Maybe some of you remember. I know some of you are rather young. This goes before you, but in 1955, a man by the name of Dr. Rudolf Flesch published a now famous book entitled Why Johnny Can't Read. I'm sure that most of you have heard of the book. In 1955, over 30 years ago, Why Johnny Can't Read. And in that book, he told the American people for the first time, he said, there's nothing wrong with American children. They don't have any special defects. He says the reason why they're not learning to read is because they're using a new method that is not teaching them to read. A new method that doesn't work. This is what he said. He said the teaching of reading all over the United States, in all the schools, in all the textbooks, is totally wrong and flies in the face of all logic and common sense. And then he went on in his book to explain what had happened. He said that around the early 1930s, the professors of education changed the way children were taught to read in American public schools. He said they threw out the alphabetic phonics method of teaching children to read, and they substituted a new method, a whole word method, a sight word method that would teach children to read English as if it were Chinese. Now, perhaps you don't understand the difference between the two methods. Let me explain. English is an alphabetic writing system. What is an alphabet? An alphabet is a set of letters, symbols, graphic symbols, that stand for something. What do they stand for? Symbols stand for something. The alphabet letters stand for the irreducible speech sounds of the language. The Russian alphabet stands for the irreducible speech sounds of the Russian language. The Hebrew alphabet does the same. The Armenian alphabet does the same, and ours does the same thing. Our letters stand for sounds. They represent sounds. And the way you teach a child to read an alphabetic writing system is that you teach him the letters of the alphabet, and then you teach him the sounds that the letters stand for. And you may teach them individually, in isolation. You know, for example, the letter B stands for the sound B. The letter H stands for the sound H. You drill the child in the alphabet sounds, one letter at a time, two letters together. In other words, baby, bi, bo, boo, in combination with vowels, ba, be, bi, ba, ba, in columns. That's the way it was done. And in any country where they use an alphabetic writing system, that's the way they teach the alphabet. If you went to Russia, if you were a little child in Russia, that's how they would teach you the Russian alphabet. When I was learning Hebrew as a youngster, in order to go to Hebrew school, that's the way I learned to read Hebrew. Ba, be, bo. The sounds of the letters. I learned how to read Hebrew. I didn't even understand what I was reading, but I could read it because I knew the sounds that the letters stood for. And the most important thing that you do in teaching a child the alphabet and the alphabetic writing system is to make sure that the child associates the letter with the sound. That's the proper association. Sound symbol. That's the proper association. Well, the professors decided that they would teach children to read English as if it were not an alphabetic writing system, but an ideographic writing system. Now, what's an ideographic writing system? Ideographs are like the Chinese. They're composed of little pictures. They want American children to look at each whole word as if it were a picture. Don't teach them the letters or the sounds of the letters. Teach them to recognize whole words on the basis of what they look like. Configuration or whatever. And that's why children cannot learn to read English, because you cannot teach an alphabetic writing system as if it were an ideographic one. It just doesn't work. You know why? You see, because when you have ideographs, there's enough distinction between them so that perhaps the child can identify something with a little ideograph. But our words, many of our words, are so much alike in configuration that the child just sees letters swimming before his eyes. And before you know it, he begins to exhibit the symptoms of dyslexia. What are the symptoms of dyslexia? Bad spelling, reversal of letters, that sort of thing. And it's only natural that a child would begin to, if the child does not associate the letter with a sound, then he doesn't know what the letters stand for. They don't evoke anything. All he knows is that they are arranged in some arbitrary sequence. And he has to try to remember what that word says. He's got to guess. The sequence of the letters doesn't mean anything to him, because if he has to look at a word as a little picture, well, when you look at a picture, do you look at it from left to right and scan it from left to right to remember every single detail from left to right? No, you look at a picture in any way you want to. The middle, whatever attracts you, right? Whatever strikes you. You look at that picture and you say, gee, I like that sunset. I like the mountains. Or I like the eyes in that portrait. That's what you do. Now you might wonder what kind of men thought up a teaching system of that kind. Well, this new system of teaching was created by America's top professors of education. And they knew that this method would not work. But I'll go into that in a little later. I just want to say first that the alphabet was invented about 2,000 years BC. The first form of writing that human beings used was pictography. Now, what is pictography? Well, the cavemen drew pictures on the walls of their caves, and you could look at them and you knew what they meant. You didn't have to go to school to read pictography. In other words, a human being looked like a human being, a tree like a tree, an animal like an animal. That was pictography. They told a story. But as civilization became more complex, the scribes had to depict ideas, actions, things which did not lend themselves to depiction. For example, how would you draw a picture of immediate, or adopt, or teach, or about, or up, or down, inside, out, or together, or result, or expect? How do you draw a picture of expect? You don't. What you do is you create a little picture and you say, that stands for expect. It doesn't look like expect. Nothing you can draw is going to look like expect. But that's how the next form of writing was invented, and they were called ideographs. And the scribes invented thousands and thousands of symbols to stand for each one of these concepts. So that by the time you get up to Egyptian civilization, you have a very complex form of writing called hieroglyphics. Very difficult to learn. Literacy was restricted to a small number of scribes who could master these thousands and thousands of symbols and remember them. And so literacy was very low in those days. But then somebody made a remarkable discovery around 2,000 years BC. Somebody made a remarkable discovery. The discovery was that all of human language, everything we say, is composed of a small number of irreducible speech sounds. Isn't that interesting? The English language has a vocabulary of upwards to 1 million words. And all of those words consist of a small number of irreducible speech sounds. How many sounds, irreducible sounds, do you think there are in the English language? I always ask this question because it's information that every child should have been given in kindergarten, or at least first grade if our schools were doing a decent job. There are only 44 sounds in the entire English language. Only 44 irreducible sounds. Do you realize that everything we say is composed of those 44 sounds in endless combinations? And so the man who made this remarkable discovery said, well, instead of having to memorize thousands and thousands of little symbols, why don't we invent a set of symbols to stand for the speech sounds of the language, and then we will be able to transcribe the spoken word into written form and then translate writing back into the spoken form. And so alphabetic writing was invented, and immediately it swept hieroglyphics off the scene. It was like the invention of the computer. Tremendous advance in learning suddenly took place. The Greeks adopted the alphabet, and you had the Greek dramas and the Greek dialogues. The alphabet didn't quite reach China. Now, I don't know if they knew about the alphabet, but the Chinese clung to their ideographic writing system. They preferred the little picture system. And the Chinese have 50,000 of them. You have to memorize 5,000 of them before you can read a Chinese newspaper. And recently, when they were having the celebration of the United Nations, a TV crew went behind the scenes to take pictures of the translators, because at the UN you have all of these different translators, and they took a picture of a Chinese translator at a Chinese typewriter. How many keys do you think a Chinese typewriter has? 1,000 keys. Well, what system of writing is better? One where you require to memorize thousands and thousands of little symbols, or only the sounds that 26 letters stand for? Now, it's true we have 44 sounds in our language, and we use a 26-symbol alphabet, 26 letters. How come? Some languages, like Armenian, have one letter for each sound. But we have 26 letters for 44 sounds. How did that happen? Well, the Romans conquered the British Isles, and they imposed the Latin alphabet on the English-speaking people, or whatever they spoke in those days. But in any case, that's how the Latin alphabet was adopted by the English-speaking peoples, and it's worked very well. It's true that some of our letters stand for more than one sound. For example, the letter A, that vowel, stands for long A, short A, which is A. It stands for A, as in father. It stands for O, as in all. It takes a little training. It takes a little more systematic training to train an English-speaking person to read English. Just a little more than necessary with a perfectly consistent alphabet. But it's not impossible. It's not insurmountable. Children have learned to read English very well in this country since its founding and over the centuries. And certainly we've created the world's greatest literature with our English writing system, so it hasn't posed any great problem. We've produced great novels, great plays, works of philosophy, theology. The King James Bible is in English, you know.